Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're teaching a language, your national language, right? But most of your students, they mainly speak another one day to day.
Yeah, that's the fascinating and, let's be honest, challenging world we're diving into today. Filipino language education, but specifically for learners who are, well, English dominant.
Exactly. In a K-12 setting, like the De La Salle Santiago Zobel school example we've got in our sources.
And we have quite a bit here that really pulls back the curtain, on the struggles, but also, importantly, the innovative strategies teachers are trying out.
Strategies to make Filipino actually stick with these kids. So our mission, really, in this deep dive, it's to cut through all the material and pull out the most crucial insights, the practical stuff.
Kind of a shortcut for you listening to understand how you can effectively build Filipino literacy when English is, the main language outside the classroom door.
And the sources waste no time setting the stage. Right away, they mention the PS 2018 results. Remember those?
Oh, yeah. The Philippines ranking dead last among 79 countries in reading literacy.
It's pretty sobering. It just hammers home why getting reading right in any language is just so critical.
Absolutely. But then zooming in on the DLSZ context specifically, the survey data paints an even sharper picture of this particular challenge.
Get this. Only about, 33% speak Filipino daily at home.
32.9, yeah. And it drops even lower at school, just over 25% daily.
Wow. Think about that. So over 70% of these students are only using Filipino sometimes or basically not daily outside of their Filipino class.
That's a huge number of kids with really limited natural everyday exposure.
And what do the students themselves say is the hardest part?
Vocabulary and word choice tops the list. Almost 65% said that.
Okay.
Grammar and sentence structure are right behind, over half struggle there. And the one that really stood out to me was confidence or anxiety, over 40%.
Yeah, that's significant. And limited exposure itself was mentioned by about a third.
And you can see how it's all connected, right? Less exposure means, well, weaker vocabulary and grammar.
Which then tanks their confidence.
Exactly. It makes them hesitant to even try, which means less practice, and the cycle continues.
So the strategies we're going to explore, they're really tailored for the specific English dominant situation, trying to break that cycle.
And they're grounded in research, but also, practical classroom application.
Okay, so let's really paint that picture, the unique DLSC context. As we said, the data is clear English rules outside the classroom for most of these students.
Which leads to what the sources call passive or limited use of Filipino. It's not zero use, maybe, but that consistent organic practice. It's just not happening for many.
Which explains why vocabulary and grammar are the big hurdles. They just aren't encountering and using the language enough naturally.
So the big takeaway here is the absolute need for teaching strategies that actively, intentionally bridge that gap. The classroom has to become a major source of meaningful exposure and practice.
And it needs to feel safe. The sources stress creating engaging, but really importantly, low-pressure environments?
Yes. If anxiety is already a factor for 40% of them, feeling put on the spot or judged is just going to shut them down.
It really highlights why the sources push for a holistic approach. You can't just drill grammar.
No, you have to actively build their confidence, that feeling of competence and also connection relatedness to the language and maybe the culture it represents.
Make them feel like they can do it and maybe even want to.
Exactly. Because ultimately, strong reading and writing in Filipino isn't just about passing the Filipino subject. It's foundational.
Foundational for what?
Well, for learning in other subjects too, for understanding Filipino society, processing local information, and, connecting with our own cultural identity.
Which ties right back into the big goal of the K-12 curriculum, right? Creating critical thinkers, good communicators, culturally aware citizens.
Precisely. So what's the underlying framework? What theories and curriculum aspects support this?
You need that solid foundation. And the sources point to a few key theories. Constructivism is one.
Right, the idea that students actively construct their own knowledge. They aren't just empty buckets waiting to be filled. The teacher becomes more of a facilitator.
Which fits perfectly with interactive, student-centered methods.
Then there's Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. It stresses how vital social interaction and cultural contexts are for learning.
So bringing in cultural elements and using group work isn't just fluff, it's actually tapping into how we learn language.
Exactly. Language is soaked in culture.
Yeah.
But maybe the most crucial one for these particular learners, the ones potentially struggling with confidence, is self-determination theory, SDT.
Okay, SDT, break that down.
It's pretty powerful. SDT basically says we're most motivated when three core psychological needs are met. Autonomy, feeling like you have some choice and control.
Yeah.
Relatedness, feeling connected to others and that what you're doing matters.
Right.
And competence, feeling like you're actually capable and effective.
Ah, I see. So for students struggling with Filipino, feeling incompetent or disconnected is a huge motivation killer.
Totally. So the insight is connecting Filipino learning to their interests, maybe their existing culture, even if it's partly through English, giving them choices in how they practice, building a supportive classroom community. That's not just nice.
It's essential for motivation.
It fosters intrinsic motivation, making them want to engage, not just feel forced to. That helps overcome the anxiety hurdle.
Okay, and how does the K-12 curriculum itself fit in? It has that mother tongue-based multilingual education principle, MTB-MLE.
Right, which usually means starting with a local mother tongue. But our sources point out something really smart. You can adapt that principle.
How so?
For these DLSE students, you can effectively treat English as their practical first language because it's their language of greatest fluency. The K-12 framework actually acknowledges links between languages.
So English isn't the enemy here.
Not at all. It's a resource. The framework allows teachers to use English strategically, especially early on, or for tricky concepts, as a scaffold while building up Filipino proficiency.
Which leads directly to the need for differentiated instruction.
Oh, absolutely non-negotiable, according to the sources. Not just good practice.
Because that survey data showed such a wide range of exposure outside class.
You're going to have a massive range of Filipino skills inside the class. You simply have to tailor the teaching. What works for one won't work for another.
Different approaches for different grade levels too, K3, 4, 6, 7, 12.
Exactly. And you need good diagnostic assessment first to even know where each student is starting from.
Okay, let's zero in on reading skills. First up, fluency.
Right. And fluency isn't just speed. It's speed, accuracy, and expression. Reading smoothly, naturally.
Why is that the first step?
Because it's the bridge to comprehension. If an English-dominant student is struggling just to decode each Filipino word, all their mental energy goes there. There's nothing left for understanding the meaning.
Ah, right. So you need to make the act of reading itself more automatic. Oral reading practice is key then.
Definitely. And the sources give us some concrete strategies. First, modeled fluent oral reading.
So the teacher reads aloud well.
Basically, yes. Or uses an audio recording. It provides a clear model of the rhythm, the intonation, what fluent Filipino sounds like.
And you'd adapt the text, right? Simple songs for little kids, complex stuff for older ones.
Exactly. Simple books or songs for K3, maybe short stories or poems for 4-6, and news articles or literary pieces for 7-12.
Okay, what else?
Assisted reading. Students read along with a model.
Like echo reading. Teacher says a line, students repeat.
Yep. Or choral reading, everyone reads together. Or partner reading, which is great for building stamina and peer support.
And for younger kids or those really struggling, phonics is still important here.
Oh, absolutely. Teaching the sounds and how they blend. Assisted reading is perfect for practicing that. Simple sentences in K3, paragraphs and turn-taking in 4-6, maybe focusing more on expression in longer texts for 7-12. Then there's repeated reading, just what it sounds like.
Reading the same thing over and over.
It naturally builds speed and accuracy. You can make it fun with things like reader's theater or reading scripts, focusing on expression.
I can see how that helps, especially for struggling readers needing that extra practice.
Yes, the sources mention one-on-one support and lots of reading practice for them. Again, adapting the texts. Simple stories for K3, paragraphs for 4-6, maybe tricky sections of longer works for 7-12.
Okay, what about sentence pyramids?
That's a visual one. You start with a core sentence like, ang bata ay mabasa. Then you add layers. Ang batang babae ay nagbabasa. Ang batang babae ay nagbabasa ng libro.
Oh, I see. It visually breaks down sentence structure, helps with grammar and vocab in context.
Exactly. Simple subject verb for K3, adding phrases in 4-6, complex clauses in 7-12.
Cool. And the last one, recording.
Recording one's reading using audio or video. The teachers noted this gives students a bit of a reality check.
They hear their own mistakes.
Yeah, their pauses, their stumbles. It encourages self-monitoring and self-correction. Gives them ownership.
So putting these together, you can really see how they provide that needed practice to get students reading Filipino smoothly, freeing up their minds to actually focus on the meaning.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which brings us neatly to the other side of the coin, comprehension.
Right, because fluent reading isn't the end goal, understanding is.
Exactly. Comprehension is an active process. interacting with the text, building meaning. And the K-12 curriculum definitely pushes beyond just decoding towards that deeper engagement.
And step one, you mentioned, is diagnostic assessment. You got to know where the breakdown is happening.
You miss it decoding, vocabulary, or understanding the bigger ideas. That tells you which strategies to deploy.
Okay, so what are some key comprehension strategies? They're broken down by timing.
Yeah, pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading. Before reading, it's all about prior knowledge activation,
Tapping into what they already know.
which is crucial for second language learners. Connecting the topic to something they know, maybe in English, gives them a mental hook for the new Filipino information. Builds schema.
How do you do that?
Things like picture walks, predicting from the title for K3. KWL charts know, wanna know, learned, or brainstorming for 4-6. Maybe pre-reading questions or concept maps for 7-12.
Okay, and during reading.
Strategies to process in real time, like prediction, guessing what's next, visualization, making mental movies, and monitoring comprehension, teaching them to check in with themselves. Am I getting this?
And knowing what to do if they're not.
Right. Questioning is also big during reading. Asking questions gives purpose, focuses attention, prompts thinking.
The sources mentioned QAR.
Question-answer relationship. Teaching students to figure out where the answer comes from. Is it right there in one sentence? Do they need to think and search across the text, connect the author and you?
Yeah.
Or is it on your own, based on their experience?
And you'd adapt the kinds of questions.
For sure. Simple who, what, where for K3. Why, how for 4-6. More critical, inferential questions for 7-12.
Okay, then after reading.
Post-reading strategies help consolidate. Retelling or summarizing is huge. Putting the story or main points in their own words. Research backs this up for improving comprehension.
How does that look across grades?
Oral retelling, maybe with pictures for K3. Graphic organizers for sequencing or main ideas for 4-6. Written summaries or deeper discussions of themes for 7-12. Also, inferencing reading between the lines. And making connections, text to self, text to text, text to world. Making it relevant.
Makes reading stick more.
Definitely. The sources also mentioned content-based instruction, CBI, using Filipino to learn about other interesting topics or subjects.
So the language becomes a tool, not just the subject itself.
Exactly. It boosts comprehension because they're engaged with the content.
So it's clear reading isn't passive. These strategies give teachers a toolkit to guide that active engagement. All right, let's tackle that monster. Mastering words, vocabulary, and those tricky idioms.
Yeah, the number one struggle, that data point, nearly 2/3 of students finding vocabulary and word choice difficult. It underpins everything, comprehension, communication.
So what's the approach?
It has to be intentional, explicit, systematic, continuous, not just memorizing lists, but understanding and using words in context.
Okay, like what?
A simple Filipino word of the day can provide consistent, manageable exposure. Introduce it, translate, encourage use.
Adapting the words, of course. Simple visuals for K3, content words for 4-6, academic terms for 7-12.
Exactly. Another powerful one is unpacking words' morphological awareness, teaching roots and affixes.
That seems really helpful for English speakers, since English uses prefixes and suffixes, too.
It is. It helps them decode unfamiliar words by recognizing parts. Start simple in K3, more complex analysis in 4-6, maybe look at cognates, similar words in 7-12.
And just reading more.
Exposure to diverse Filipino texts is fundamental. Reading aloud from all sorts of genres, picture books, folk songs, novels, articles. The more context they see words in, the deeper the understanding.
Right. Picture books K3, short novels 4-6, maybe classics like Ibong Adarna or contemporary stuff for 7-12.
And make practice engaging. Gamification, vocabulary games.
Okay, now what about Sawikain? Idioms. Almost half struggled with those too.
And idioms are tough because they're so cultural. You can't just translate them literally. The source is called teaching them a gateway to culture.
So how do you teach them? Not just definitions.
Definitely not. Discussing the literal versus figurative meaning is key. The drawing idioms idea is great. Visualize the literal, then explain the figurative. Clarifies the abstraction.
Works for all ages, just different idioms.
Yeah. Concrete ones for younger kids, more abstract for older. Role-playing and charades are also fantastic. Interactive, memorable practice.
Using them in context.
Or finding them in mentor texts, stories, or poems where they're used naturally. Picture books often have simple ones, novels, more complex examples.
And online games?
Sure, online games, task cards provide structured, interactive practice.
So it's clear. Mastering words in Filipino, especially for these learners, goes way beyond dictionary definitions. It's about nuance and culture.
Absolutely. These strategies offer engaging ways to build that deeper understanding.
Okay, let's broaden the view a bit. Tools for deeper learning. text analysis and technology.
Right. Text analysis is about critical thinking, a core K-12 goal. Students need to look at the text critically, not just read through it.
And teachers need to explicitly teach how.
Yes, guiding them to question, interpret, evaluate, adapting the complexity by grade, of course.
Like what kinds of analysis?
Identifying the author's purpose and perspective. Why was this written? What's the author's angle? For older students, that includes spotting fact versus opinion bias.
Start simple, like why was this story written for K3, then gets more complex.
Exactly. Identifying main idea and details is another basic but crucial one. What's the core message? What supports it?
Again, building from the big idea in K3 to analyzing complex arguments in 712.
Analyzing text structure, how it's organized, like sequence or cause-effect, helps comprehension too.
And close reading. That sounds intense.
It's about diving deep into the language itself. Word choices, imagery, sentence structure, literary devices. Why these words? What deeper meaning is created?
Building that skill slowly, from noticing repetition in K3 to full literary analysis in 712.
You got it. And then there's technology.
Ah yes, the tech piece. Challenges exist, infrastructure and all that.
True, but the sources strongly argue for integrating tech as a core tool, not an add-on.
Why? What's the big advantage for these specific learners?
Personalization is one,
Yeah.
but maybe even bigger is the low-pressure environment it can create.
Ah, right. Less intimidating to practice with an app than speak in front of the class if you're anxious.
Exactly. Instant feedback, gamified practice, it can really boost confidence and motivation for hesitant speakers.
So what kinds of tech?
Things like learning management systems, LMS, like Google Classroom to keep things organized, interactive whiteboards for visual learning, adaptive learning platforms that adjust to the student's level.
Like Khan Academy or IXL, but maybe for Filipino? Or using their structure?
Potentially, or finding equivalent resources. Language learning apps like Memrise or Duolingo for practice, writing tools like quill.org for grammar feedback, and just access to digital libraries and ebooks for more reading material.
So tech provides tailored support and safe spaces for practice.
Used well, yes. It's another important tool in the modern teacher's toolkit.
Okay, this next part feels like a potential game changer. Bridging languages using translation and translanguaging.
It really is interesting. Translation is kind of making a comeback, but in a specific way.
How so?
Pedagogical translation. It can help conscious learners see connections and differences between languages, which aids understanding and vocabulary building. The idea is often starting with L1, English for these kids, for comprehension or planning, then moving to L2, Filipino.
Not just word for word swapping.
No, absolutely not. It has to be strategic translation, focusing on meaning, context, culture. It helps English-dominant learners link new Filipino concepts to their existing English knowledge base.
Using what they know as a bridge.
Exactly. And then there's translanguaging.
Which sounds related, but different.
It is. Translanguaging recognizes that multilingual people naturally use all their language resources, English, Filipino, maybe other dialects fluidly, together to make meaning. It's not about keeping languages strictly separate.
So you view their entire linguistic toolkit as one resource.
Pretty much. And the benefits for these learners are huge. Using English as scaffolding to explain a complex grammar point, give instructions, provide feedback isn't cheating, it supports understanding in Filipino.
It actually helps them learn Filipino better.
Yes, by allowing comparisons, drawing connections between structures or vocabulary, and crucially, it creates a safer, more positive learning environment.
How so?
If a student can use a bit of English to ask a question or express a complex idea they don't have the Filipino words for yet, they're more likely to participate, to take risks, which builds confidence.
Instead of just staying silent because they don't know the perfect Filipino phrase?
Precisely. It validates their existing skills and uses them as a resource, not an obstacle. It integrates their whole linguistic identity.
Wow. So instead of seeing English as the problem, you leverage it as a tool, a bridge.
That's the core idea. It makes learning Filipino more accessible and less intimidating.
Okay, let's distill this. What are the absolute key takeaways and recommendations?
Well, the core problem is clear. English dominance leading to specific struggles, vocab, grammar, confidence exposure.
And the solution has to be holistic, research-backed, addressing skills and motivation, like with SDT.
Right. So the concrete recommendations boil down to this.
1.
Implement differentiated instruction, non-negotiable. Use assessments to tailor it. Prioritize reading fluency. Dedicated oral practice using those very techniques.
3.
Deepen comprehension actively. pre, during, post-reading strategies, maybe CBI.
War.
Systematically develop vocabulary and idioms. Explicit teaching, context, culture.
5.
Integrate technology as a core tool for personalization, engagement, low-stakes practice.
And 6.
Embrace translation and translanguaging. Use English strategically as that bridge.
Build understanding, confidence, make it a safe space.
Exactly. Applying these isn't just about better test scores, it's about fostering real skills and hopefully a genuine appreciation for the Filipino language and culture.
So, reflecting on this deep dive, you listening have just gotten a pretty comprehensive look at the unique challenges and, importantly, the innovative strategies for teaching Filipino literacy when English is the primary language at home.
Drawing specifically from that DLSD context, but with relevance for the broader K-12 framework.
And these aren't just theories spun out of thin air, they're practical responses to the real needs we saw in the data, aimed at creating more confident, more proficient Filipino speakers and readers. And here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on. We know language, culture, and identity are deeply intertwined. So how might strategically, effectively building Filipino proficiency, even in these English-dominant environments, how might that ultimately contribute to a stronger sense of national belonging and cultural connection for young Filipinos?
That's a powerful question to consider. Okay, let's dive in. So picture this. You're a student, right, sitting in class, looking at this page of Filipino text, and it just feels impossible. Maybe you know some words, but putting it all together, actually getting the meaning, it feels like wading through treacle or something. That feeling, that block. It's huge for learning.
It really is, and that's the reality for, well, a lot of K-12 students, especially, in places like the Philippines where Filipino is taught, but maybe it's not the language they're using all day at home.
Right. And the data, it really highlights how serious this is. We're looking at sources pointing to things like the PISA 2018 results. The Philippines ranked last in reading among 79 countries.
It's stark. And it's not just a number, right? It's millions of kids facing that exact struggle you just described.
Exactly. So the sources we're looking at today, they're basically teacher workshop materials.
Yeah.
And they're really focused on why it's tough for a specific group, these English-dominant learners.
One survey mentioned found over 70% of students only sometimes use Filipino daily outside school. Or never.
70%. Wow. Okay, so for most of their day, they're in English, probably.
Yeah.
How does that lack of immersion affect their Filipino reading?
Well, the sources flag a few big things. Vocabulary. That's cited as the #1 challenge. Almost 65% in that survey. Just knowing the words. That's the first wall.
Makes sense.
Then grammar, that's over 52%. But here's what's really interesting, I think. Confidence or lack of it and just limited exposure. Those are massive too. Over 41% for confidence, almost 29% for exposure.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about the language skills, it's also feeling anxious, maybe insecure, and not getting enough practice.
Totally. It becomes this cycle. You don't have much exposure, so your vocab and grammar are shaky, which makes you feel unconfident, so you kind of shy away from using it.
Which dilutes your exposure to even more.
Right.
Got it. It feeds itself.
Exactly.
Okay. So the mission for this deep dive then, using these teacher materials, is to really unpack the strategies, the practical, hopefully research-backed ways to, break that cycle. How can teachers actually build reading skills, tackle those specific issues, vocab, grammar, confidence, especially for these English-dominant kids, and, make learning Filipino feel less scary, maybe even engaging?
That's the goal. We'll start with the absolute basics, like getting the words off the page smoothly. That's fluency and understanding the basic meaning, comprehension.
Right.
Then we'll move into deeper analysis, how tech can play a role, which is interesting. And then this idea of using the languages kids already have, multilingualism as a tool.
Using what they bring with them. Okay, sounds like a plan. Let's jump into part 1, building that foundation.
Okay, so back to that core problem. That data point, over 70% with limited daily Filipino use outside of school, that lack of immersion hits hard. Vocabulary, grammar, they just don't develop as naturally.
Which totally explains why vocab is the biggest pain point for nearly 2/3 of them?
Yeah.
If you don't know the words, you're stuck before you start.
Pretty much. And like you said, that just chips away at confidence. If every sentence feels like a struggle, you're not going to want to read aloud, you're not going to pick up a book in Filipino for fun, and that exposure gap just widens.
So the strategies have to do more than just teach words and rules. They've got to build that comfort, that feeling of I can actually do this.
Exactly. It needs to address the student's whole relationship with the language.
So what's the thinking behind these strategies? What, theories are guiding them?
They're grounded in some pretty solid learning ideas. You've got constructivism, this idea that kids actively build understanding. They don't just absorb it.
Right.
Active learning.
Then there's sociocultural theory. Really emphasizes that learning, especially language, happens through interaction. Talking, discussing, working together.
Makes sense. You learn language by using it with people. And crucially for this group, there's self-determination theory. This one's about motivation. It says people are driven when they feel competent, like they have some control, autonomy, and feel connected.
Competence, autonomy, connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And building that feeling of competence, feeling capable and feeling connected, that's so important for these English-dominant kids who might feel, kind of lost or stressed when faced with Filipino texts.
Yeah, if you feel like you can do it and you belong, you're way more likely to try, right?
Absolutely. The strategies also fit within the K-12 curriculum framework and this key idea from mother tongue-based multilingual education, MTB, MLE.
Okay.
The principle there is that you learn best by building on a language you already know well. And the insight here is, for kids whose strong language is English, well, English itself can be that bridge to learning Filipino.
Using the language they know to learn the one they don't. That's smart.
It is. And because classrooms are so diverse, right? Even within this English dominant group, there's a huge range of proficiency. So the materials really stress differentiated instruction. It's not a nice to have, it's essential.
You got to tailor it.
Yeah. Teachers need ways to figure out where each kid is at diagnostic assessment and adjust what they're doing.
Okay, let's get specific then. The toolbox. First up, fluency. Getting smoother.
Yeah.
How do these strategies help with that?
Right, fluency. So it's about reading with decent speed, being accurate, and having some expression. It's not just racing through.
Okay.
Think of it like driving. If you're constantly jerking the wheel or slamming the brakes, you can't really pay attention to where you're going.
Yeah, you're just focused on not crashing.
Exactly. Fluent reading frees up your brain to actually think about the meaning.
Got it. So how do you build that?
Well, a basic one is modeled fluent oral reading. Pretty straightforward. The teacher, or maybe a skilled student, reads aloud well. Good pace, good intonation, putting the feeling in.
So kids hear what it's supposed to sound like.
Exactly, especially helpful for younger kids or anyone not used to hearing written Filipino read aloud. And you can use different texts, picture books up to more complex stuff.
Like giving them an audio guide.
Yeah, kinda. Then there's assisted reading. This is great for building confidence because you're reading with someone.
Less pressure.
Right. So you have echo reading, teacher reads, students repeat, choral reading, everyone reads together. But partner reading is really powerful. Kids pair up, take turns reading to each other.
Peer practice.
Yeah. Low stakes, they get immediate feedback from a classmate. The workshop materials actually have teachers try this out, practice partner reading with different texts to see how it feels.
Getting feedback from a friend probably feels safer than from the teacher sometimes. Could definitely help that confidence issue.
You really can. Another technique is repetitive reading. Just reading the same short text several times.
Doesn't that get boring?
It could, but you make it engaging. Use readers' theater, give them scripts, have them practice reading parts with expression. It directly improves speed and accuracy. It's even used for older kids like grade 7 or 8 if they're still struggling with the basics.
Okay.
And the sources suggest, like in the workshop, using a timer. Read it once, time it. Practice a few times, read it again, time it. Seeing that number go down, that's motivating.
Oh yeah, seeing actual progress like that would feel good.
Definitely. And speaking of seeing progress, there's recording one's reading using like a phone app. Kids record themselves reading.
Oh, interesting. The dreaded sound of your own voice.
Maybe, but it's a reality check, right? You hear exactly where you pause, where you stumble. It helps build awareness of your own reading metacognition.
So you start to notice your own patterns.
Yeah. And the teacher can use it too. Hey, I noticed you paused here. What was tricky about that word? It prompts reflection. They suggest demoing the self-monitoring in the workshop.
Okay, that makes the fuzzy idea of read better really concrete. You can actually hear it. All right, so fluency helps clear the way. What about actually understanding the meaning? Comprehension.
Right, comprehension. That's the whole point, isn't it? Making sense of it all. Fluency is the bridge that lets the brain focus on meaning.
Okay.
And for these English-dominant learners, you often have to get over that initial decoding hump in Filipino before the deeper understanding can really click easily.
Fluency first, then meaning. makes sense. So what are the comprehension strategies?
Well, active questioning is huge, Q&A. But it's not just the teacher asking questions after reading. It's teaching kids to ask questions themselves before, during, after. Like, what? What do I already know about this? What might happen next? Why did you do that? Wait, did I get that last part? Asking questions keeps them engaged.
Active reading, not passive.
Exactly. And the sources push the QAR technique question-answer relationship. It teaches kids how to find the answer. Is it right there in one sentence? Do you have to think and search across a few sentences? Is it author and you using clues plus your own knowledge? Or on your own, just based on your experience?
So it's teaching the process of answering, not just finding the fact.
Precisely. The workshop has teachers practice QAR with a text. Then you've got graphic organizers and summarizing.
Charts and maps.
Yeah, visual tools, concept maps, Venn diagrams, story maps, timelines. They help students see how ideas connect, how the text is structured, especially useful for older kids and complex stuff.
Right, helps organize thoughts.
And summarizing, putting the main points in your own words. That's like the ultimate check. Did you really get it? Research backs this up big time. The teacher activity is, you guessed it, make a concept map and summarize something.
Visualizing it, boiling it down, good tools.
Definitely. And we have to come back to vocabulary building. Remember that stat? Biggest challenge?
Yeah, nearly 65%.
So strategies include teaching context clues, how to guess meaning from the words around it. Word analysis, breaking words down, looking for roots, prefixes, suffixes, like knowing Pineka means most.
Word detective skills.
Kind of. Using dictionaries effectively, keeping personal word lists or journals. The workshop has teachers practice using context and analysis before grabbing the dictionary. Word walls in the classroom are also suggested. Simple visual reminders.
So it's about equipping them to figure out words independently, not just memorizing lists.
And that's the idea. Then, moving up a bit, inferencing and predicting.
Reading between the lines.
Exactly. Inferencing is figuring out what the author implies but doesn't say directly, using clues and what you already know. Predicting is guessing what comes next keeps you hooked.
Right, makes you want to keep reading to see if you're right.
Yeah. Teachers can pause during reading. Okay, what can we infer about his feelings here? Or what's your prediction? The sources mention a neat activity. Show a silent video clip, pause it, ask what happens next. It shows how engaging prediction is, same as in reading. Oh, that's clever. Makes it really tangible.
It does. And finally, making connections. This is about making it relevant, linking the text to your own life, text to self.
Like, this character reminds me of my cousin.
Exactly. Or connecting it to other books or movies, text to text. Or to things happening in the world, text to world. When kids see how it connects to them, it sticks.
Makes it meaningful.
Right. The workshop activity is just sharing a book you personally connected with to illustrate that power.
So all these strategies, they're really about getting kids to actively wrestle with the text, right? Not just passively receive it, which seems super important if they don't have much outside exposure.
That's the heart of it. Turn reading into an active, sense-making process. Okay, shall we move to part 2, going a bit deeper?
Yeah, let's do it. Beyond the basics.
Okay, so stepping up to critical reading. This is crucial for older students, more complex texts.
Yeah.
One area is analyzing text structure and elements.
Like how the author put it together. Exactly. For stories, that's characters, plot, conflict, theme. For informational texts, it's recognizing patterns, cause-effect, problem-solution, comparison, sequence. Knowing the structure helps you navigate and find the important stuff.
Like having a map for the text.
Yeah. Outlining or diagramming can help teach this. The workshop has an activity where teachers outline an essay to find its structure and main points.
Okay. Understanding the how, not just the what.
Precisely. Another big one, especially now. Identifying the author's purpose and perspective. Why was this written? To inform, persuade, entertain, what's the author's viewpoint? Is there bias?
Super important for evaluating information online, too.
Absolutely vital. Fact versus opinions, source credibility. It all ties in. The workshop talks about spotting signs of bias in writing.
Teaching them to be critical consumers of text.
Essential skill. And then metacognitive strategies. Thinking about your own thinking while you read.
The inner monologue.
Yeah. Monitoring your understanding. Noticing when you get confused. Good readers do it automatically, like, whoa, that sentence didn't make sense, better reread, or, why did the character do that? Let me think back.
How do you teach that?
The think aloud technique is great. The teacher reads aloud, but also voices their internal thought process. Okay, the author used the word ubiquitous. Not sure I know that one. Let me see if the next sentence gives a clue. Ah, it says found everywhere. Okay, got it.
Making the invisible visible.
Exactly. They suggest a role-play activity for teachers to practice doing think-alouds.
That sounds really powerful, making expert reading processes explicit. Okay, what about technology? You mentioned that.
Right, technology. The sources acknowledge, access can be an issue, infrastructure varies, but they really highlight its potential, especially for these English-dominant learners.
How so?
Well, practicing digitally might feel less intimidating for some kids, and tech can offer personalized help. It's not about replacing the teacher, obviously, but extending their reach.
Okay, like what kind of tech?
Several things. Audiobooks and narration apps. They provide great models of fluent reading. Kids can listen and follow along in the text, connects the sound to the symbol.
Good for pronunciation too, I bet.
Definitely. And here's one that's maybe surprising. Closed captioning. Just watching videos with Filipino subtitles, that is reading practice.
Really? Just watching TV?
Well, purposefully.
Yeah.
Research shows it helps with word recognition, fluency, linking spoken and written language, even for kids who aren't keen on traditional reading. Showing a clip with captions is a workshop activity.
Huh. That's such a low barrier way to get some practice in. Everyone watches videos.
Exactly. And remember, motivation. Recording progress digitally. Using simple apps or digital platforms like Seesaw or Google Classroom, kids can save recordings of themselves reading or samples of writing, create a portfolio.
So they can actually see or hear themselves getting better over time.
Yeah, that visual or auditory proof of growth, super motivating. Then you have interactive ebooks and apps.
The gamified stuff.
Sometimes, yeah. Built-in dictionaries, quizzes, cool graphics, making reading practice feel more like a game through apps like Epic or Raz Kids or maybe local Filipino versions can really boost engagement. The key is purposeful use, though, not just distraction.
Right. Smart integration.
And really importantly, accessibility tools. Things built into devices or apps like text-to-speech, adjustable fonts, reader modes that simplify the screen. These are lifesavers for kids with learning differences like dyslexia or even just visual challenges.
Making the text physically easier to access.
Crucial first step. The sources even have a table summarizing useful tech. Learning management systems, interactive whiteboards, adaptive learning platforms, language apps like Duolingo, writing tools, listing benefits for K-12 and these specific learners.
Well, sounds like a handy resource. Okay, so tech offers tools, but it's about picking the right one for the job.
Absolutely. Now, the really powerful one, I think, embracing multilingualism.
Using the fact that kids often know more than one language.
Exactly. The Philippines is incredibly multilingual. So the sources talk about using translation strategically, not just rote drills, but using English translation thoughtfully to explain a tricky Filipino word or concept.
Connecting the new Filipino idea to the known English one.
Right. It acts as a bridge for vocabulary and understanding. Building on that, there's translanguaging.
Okay, fancy word. What's that?
It's actually quite natural. It's just recognizing that multilingual people use all their languages, their entire linguistic toolkit to make sense of the world and communicate. In the classroom, it means allowing students to draw on their strongest language, often English, as a resource while they're learning Filipino.
Wait, so you let them use English in Filipino class? Doesn't that, slow down their Filipino learning? That feels wrong somehow.
That's the immediate reaction, right? But the research and what these sources emphasize is that it's actually the opposite. It's not a crutch, it's a lever. Okay, think about it. Allowing strategic use of English helps teachers quickly explain complex ideas in Filipino, prevents kids getting totally lost and frustrated. It lets students compare Filipino grammar, or words, to English, which can actually deepen their understanding of both languages.
Okay.
And crucially, it lowers the anxiety. If a student knows they can fall back on an English word if they get really stuck, they're way more likely to participate, to try, to ask questions in Filipino. Remember how big a barrier confidence was?
Yeah, over 40% cited it.
Translanguaging directly tackles that by validating all their language skills. It creates a safer space. It also allows for richer discussions about complex topics or cultural nuances because they can use their strongest language to express those initial complex thoughts before figuring out how to say it in Filipino.
Okay, so letting them use English strategically actually helps them learn Filipino better and feel more confident doing it. Yeah, that's a big shift in thinking.
It is, and it aligns perfectly with those MTB-MLE principles build on what the child knows. Their whole language system is what they know. The workshop actually has an activity where teachers plan how they'd use translanguaging to explain something tricky in Filipino, making it practical.
Wow, okay, this has been a lot. We've gone from just getting words off the page smoothly to understanding meaning to analyzing critically, using tech, and now leveraging other languages.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Tackling the reading challenge for K-12 Filipino learners, especially the English-dominant ones, needs a whole range of tools. There's no single magic bullet.
Right. It's about having this diverse toolbox and knowing when to use which tool.
Yeah.
Very learner-centered.
Exactly. Differentiated instruction is key. Teachers need to be comfortable using all sorts of things we talked about. Reading aloud, retelling stories, using videos, maybe book clubs as graphic organizers, reading journals, the whole lot.
And it sounds like just lots of practice. Consistent reading time is essential.
It's non-negotiable. And targeted help for kids who are really struggling. Maybe one-on-one support, explicit remedial instruction. And it's not just on the teacher, right? The sources mentioned building a reading culture involves parents, community, big initiatives like DepEd's 3Bs program.
Bada boom Pagbasa.
Yeah.
Every child reads.
That's the goal.
This deep dive really clarified the specific hurdles, the exposure gap, the vocab wall, the confidence dip, and the very practical, thoughtful strategies teachers can use. It's not just theory, it's actionable stuff.
Yeah, it shows how understanding the why behind the struggle leads to these research-backed, interactive ways to build skills and, just as importantly, build a more positive connection with the Filipino language itself.
So, wrapping this up, maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. How does your own confidence, your own background knowledge affect how you learn something new? Could you apply any of these ideas, like using a bridge language or concept you already know well, or focusing on building confidence first in your own learning, or maybe when helping someone else learn? And what does it really mean to read deeply? Not just decoding, but navigating meaning across languages, across cultures. Something to chew on.